Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladia Kiridoluale. The headlines. Pentagon says it can't corroborate reports of Russian nuclear arms movement. Leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, says his country is participating in the war but is not an active military party. An ex-U.S. Marine, Robert Gilman, is jailed in Russia for a drunken attack. A senior Pentagon official says she has no information to corroborate reports suggesting Russia might be moving tactical nuclear weapons by rail, and added that the United States military had not seen anything to change its own nuclear posture. She says that she had only open source reports that the Pentagon was closely monitoring that Russian nuclear forces, a core part of its mission since the Cold War, was under scrutiny.
We have certainly heard the saber rattling from Putin, but we see no signs that would cause us to alter our posture in terms of the nuclear piece. And today I'm proud to announce a new security assistance package to provide Ukraine with more weapons, ammunition, and equipment that its forces are using so effectively on the battlefield. This authorization of a presidential drawdown of security assistance valued at up to $625 million will contribute to meeting Ukraine's critical defense needs.
And South Korea has responded to North Korea's missile test by readying its warplanes for bombing drills with the U.S. military. South Korea's military said that it mobilized 4 F-15K fighter jets and dropped a pair of guided bombs on a target of its west coast in what it called a demonstration of precision strike capability against the source of North Korean provocations. The United States sent 4 F-16 fighter jets to the drills as well. Officials in Tokyo and Seoul said the North's ballistic missiles flew 4,500 to 4,600 kilometers to a maximum altitude of about 1,000 kilometers. The missile test was the latest in an escalating cycle of muscle flexing in the region. A U.S. aircraft carrier made a port call in South Korea for the first time since 2018 on September the 23rd, and North Korea has conducted 5 launches in the last 10 days. And Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has accused neighboring Ukraine of sending 15,000 troops to the border area to build defenses and conduct reconnaissance actions that he called provocations. Mr. Lukashenko allowed his close ally Russia in February to use Belarus as a staging post for Moscow's special military operation in Ukraine. However, he has said Belarus is not a party to the conflict and that its own forces are not involved. In comments carried by the state news agency Belta, Mr. Lukashenko said the Ukrainian unit brought up to the border had blocked roads and was setting up checkpoints and firing positions. Ukrainian officials did not immediately respond to a request for comments. Mr. Lukashenko said his country was involved in the conflict only to prevent it from spreading into Belarus and to prevent an attack on Belarus under the guise of a special military operation from either Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. He stressed that Belarus is not planning to announce any mobilization, but that it intends to learn from Russia's experience. Belarus's 3 western neighbors are all part of the NATO Transatlantic Alliance, which is helping Ukraine to defend itself against Russia with weapons and intelligence, but says it will not take a direct part in the conflict.
Ukraine has gathered up to 15,000 troops in the border area, is increasing its defenses at checkpoints and firing positions near our border. It has constructed roadblocks. In a word, not only has Ukraine barricaded itself in, but has built a wall. They are constantly conducting optical, radio electronics, and radio technical reconnaissance for our territory. Troops and strategic sites, often using drones that have violated the state border, and at the same time, they are concerned that, don't let Belarus enter the war, and there are constant provocations at the border.
And a map used by the Russian Defense Ministry in its daily briefing has confirmed significant Russian losses in Ukraine's Kherson region compared to a map of the same region used during its briefing on Monday. The map confirms reports from Ukrainian and pro-Russian officials as well as pro-Russian military analysts of significant Ukrainian advances towards the occupied city of Kherson down the western bank of the Dnipro River. Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov, who spoke while the map was shown full screen, did not mention the losses. But he did say that the Russian military destroyed Ukrainian armor and killed Kyiv's forces in the areas of several towns that are now understood to be under Ukrainian control, a tacit acknowledgement of Ukraine's advance. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has spoken with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and that's according to a statement from the president himself on his official Telegram channel. According to him, we discussed the so-called referenda recently held by Russia on the temporarily occupied territories of our country with the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. We also talked about food and nuclear security, interaction within international organizations, first of all in the UN. It is important to strengthen Ukrainian-Indian partnerships against the background of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Rather than cutting economic ties with the Kremlin, India has undermined Western sanctions by increasing its purchases of Russian oil, coal, and fertilizer, giving President Putin a vital financial lifeline. New Delhi has repeatedly abstained from votes condemning Russia at the United Nations, providing Moscow with a veneer of international legitimacy. And in August, India participated in Russia's large-scale Vostok military exercises alongside China, Belarus, Mongolia, and Tajikistan, where Moscow paraded its vast arsenal. The apparent contradiction exemplifies India's position on the war, verbally distancing itself from Russia while continuing to maintain pivotal ties with Moscow. Police removed Robert Gilman, an ex-U.S. Marine, from a train after complaints from fellow passengers. He was then arrested for kicking an officer while in custody. Mr. Gilman told the court in Voronezh, southwest Russia, that he did not remember the incident but apologized to Russia and the officer. After being found guilty, Mr. Gilman, who is 28 and is said to be from Massachusetts, said the sentence requested by the prosecution was too strict. The lawyers told TASS, the Russian state news agency, that Mr. Gilman was in Russia to study and obtain citizenship. Mr. Gilman was reportedly staying in Sochi, but headed by train to Moscow to replace his damaged passport at the U.S. Embassy. His lawyers said they would appeal against the court's decision and contact U.S. officials to seek a prisoner exchange. There have been several high-profile cases of Americans being sentenced to lengthy prison terms in Russia recently. This could lead to prisoner swaps, a process often seen as hostage diplomacy, where countries use people as bargaining chips. Over 200,000 people have already been drafted into Russia's armed forces since President Vladimir Putin ordered a partial mobilization 2 weeks ago, and that's according to Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Mr. Shoigu had announced that he planned to enlist 300,000 men with previous military experience to bolster Russia's military operation in Ukraine, where it has suffered a series of defeats in recent weeks. However, the official decree did not include a figure, and officials are keen to allay public fears that the actual number could be higher, as even pro-Kremlin figures voice concern that people are being recruited indiscriminately. Reports have surfaced of men with no military experience or past draft age receiving call-up papers, adding to outrage that has reignited dormant and banned demonstration against what Moscow calls its special military operations. And Russian reservists undertook combat training in Russia-controlled parts of Donetsk region of Ukraine, even as their forces were being pushed back by Ukraine on two separate battlefield fronts. The men were recently drafted on the Russian president's orders of partial mobilization and moved to areas close to the combat zone. Military instructors taught the recruits to fire small arms and anti-tank grenade launchers. Mr. Putin on September 21 ordered the mobilization, as we've just reported, of 300,000 personnel, and more than 200,000 of that number are said to have been mobilized already. Let's talk now to a senior researcher at the Center for Security Studies at the ETH Zurich. His name is Henrik Larsen, and he joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Henrik. Thank you for your time. Good morning. Let's start off with this issue of the tit for tat happening in the Koreas, perhaps. Do you think this has anything to do with what is going on in Ukraine and the Russia conflict, especially because this is not the first time that North Korea has fired off test missiles over this area. But this is the first time that we've seen such a strong response from South Korea and the United States.
Yeah, of course, North Korea tried to exploit the moment, like it's a diversion. Like everyone else is focused on Ukraine, so it's the right moment for them to do this kind of test, you can say.
In that kind of situation, if you put that side by side with what is going on in Ukraine right now, where we're hearing that the reports are unconfirmed, but they are nevertheless being reported that Russia might be moving tactical nuclear weapons by train to the areas of Ukraine that it controls. And when you link that with what President Putin said over the weekend, that he was not bluffing when he said it is possible that they would use nuclear weapons, do you see this as some kind of escalation beyond what perhaps is being expected?
I don't know what has been expected. I think this is what you could expect Putin to say, these kind of things. This kind of nuclear coercion. I mean, we're still in the early stages of nuclear coercion, if you want to call it like that. It could become more serious as Ukraine liberates more territory.
If that is so, you don't seem worried about this, because you say your initial response was that, yeah, this is what he's been saying. But you don't seem worried. You think this is a bluff.
Yeah, I actually do. For the moment, I would say that it's a bluff, because Russia clumsily has annexed territory in Ukraine without clarity about which part of the regions that it has annexed, which part of them are supposed to be Russian territory. That's not clear at all. So that's why there is no clear stated red line, no credible red line on the side of the Russians, beyond which they would actually use nuclear weapons to protect the very existence of the Russian state, as is stated in the Russian nuclear military doctrines. So therefore, for the moment, I am not too worried. There's a lot of blustering for Russia. That would be a huge step to take, the nuclear escalation.
But do you think that perhaps if they're pushed to the wall, which is what you said now, that is within the authorities in Russia, they see what is happening, and perhaps they may be faced with some catastrophic defeat by a force that is much smaller than theirs, and of course in front of the whole world, that they might in fact use this doctrine?
Yeah, but I think that is a real possibility, but you have to also take into account that Putin has just, or a week ago, issued this partial mobilization. So the troops are arriving to the front slowly. They have to be trained and equipped. That will take months. But probably the Russian goal is to make the front stable by the winter, because in the wintertime, it's more difficult to conduct offensive operations, according to military experts. So this is probably the escalation we're looking at now. It doesn't mean that when we get into spring, that would be my prediction. If things go back for the Russians in spring, if their own forces are not motivated and not able to hold the territories that Russia has annexed, I think then we could be looking at the scenario of nuclear coercion that you're talking about here, and perhaps even the use of nuclear weapons, tactical, smaller yield nuclear warheads.
You are in Zurich, Switzerland. That's where you're joining us from. Many countries that had remained neutral prior to the start of this conflict, Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, there's several of them like that, which have tried to stay out of conflicts like this, but which are obviously Western allies. I mean, that is clear. Seem to be revising their defense strategy in the aftermath of what happened in February and subsequently. From the Swiss perspective, do you think that it is possible that they would also revise their strategy, especially if this conflict goes the way of Ukraine?
I mean, if we talk about Swiss neutrality, it remains confined to strict military neutrality because, as you know, Switzerland has joined the European sanctions against Russia, partly because it couldn't do otherwise, partly because Russia has broken international law. I mean, attacking a neighbor, an unprovoked aggression is a violation of international law that Switzerland stands for. So, I mean, Switzerland probably has gone as far as it can do. It would not provide military assistance to Ukraine or change its post. When you talk about Denmark, so I'm a native Dane. Denmark is a full member of the NATO alliance and provides weapons to Ukraine, although not in great numbers.
Let's look at the other consequence of what has happened so far, which is the issue of energy prices and the energy crisis that that has come out of this conflict. A lot has been said about how this is affecting the United States, the United Kingdom, and then, of course, with the leakage from Nord Stream 1 and 2, how it's affecting Germany and so on. But I'm happy you mentioned that you're a native Dane. So let's take a look at the situation in Denmark, which is one of the countries along where this pipeline is situated. I mean, I think there was a report yesterday that there has been some mobilization to protect gas energy infrastructure. What's the situation as you know it on the ground? Are people worried? They're beginning to see that, well, maybe this isn't so far away after all.
People are a little bit worried, but actually also happy on the other hand, because it's better to have these attacks against gas lines, presumably Russian attacks, than to have a nuclear escalation. So from that perspective, it's better to have this kind of undeclared hybrid attacks against Western infrastructure than it is to have a nuclear post ring. And when it comes to energy prices, I'm actually quite optimistic on Europe's part. It doesn't look like Putin over the winter will have luck in blackmailing or pushing the Europeans into a situation where they would abandon their support for Ukraine because the energy prices will raise. It looks like it has the opposite effect, actually, that the European publics are outraged about this unprovoked aggression and that they are willing to suffer. They are willing to have less heating in their houses, for instance. So altogether, it doesn't look very good for Putin and his war. It can become a dangerous situation of nuclear escalation beyond the winter.
But then if you look at OPEC is expected to meet sometime today, that is OPEC plus. And if what analysts say are to be believed, they're expected to slice off 1 million barrels of oil a day from the projected output. That would have impact on the prices. And perhaps, do you think there's a tolerance level? Because yesterday we reported that there were some demonstrations against what is now economic problems in Germany. And before that, of course, we had heard about the reversal that had happened in the UK vis-a-vis the issue of economic problems, mainly resulting from this energy problems.
Yeah, well, from the sources I have read, they are still like marginal demonstrations. It's not something that really moves the political landscape. Yeah, I remain quite optimistic on Europe's part to withstand the winter and beyond the winter transition into like getting sources, other energy sources from elsewhere.
Before I let you go, let me ask you this this final question. The EU, as a result of this crisis, the European Union and NATO have taken front and center. And even though we have seen some of the individual countries highlight their own peculiarities, a great deal of unity has resulted from this Ukraine-Russia situation. But going forward now, in the sense of European identity going forward, do you think this crisis, whichever way it ends up being resolved, whether on the military field or in terms of diplomacy, will change the way Europeans view the EU and their membership of NATO positively?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This war is a big boost to NATO. Yeah, I mean, the skepticism towards cooperation with the Americans in NATO has evaporated to the extent there was this kind of skepticism. It is clear now that security cannot be taken for granted. So definitely NATO gotten a huge boost. With regard to the EU, I mean, yeah, Ukraine has now become a membership candidate for EU membership. Candidate for EU membership. Sorry. There is solidarity with Ukraine that's now results in the fact that the EU now is willing to consider Ukraine as a member in the future if it is willing to effectuate the reforms. Yeah, the unity has increased in the EU too, but it is more in the NATO realm that you really see consolidation of interest.
Well, we'll have to wait and see indeed how that works out in the days ahead. But Henrik Larsson, thank you very much for joining us today from Zurich in Switzerland. Thank you. Still to come on the program, pressure mounts on Germany as energy crunch revives EU divisions over joint debt. Please stay on with us. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. Ukrainian police claim to have uncovered what it calls a torture chamber in the formerly Russian-occupied town of Pesky Radivsky in the eastern Kharkiv region. Among the items found, according to the police, was a container full of extracted gold teeth. Serhiy Boldinov, head of the investigation department of the National Police in Kharkiv, said that after the liberation of the village, local residents reported to the police that in the basement of one of the houses captives were kept, including local residents, soldiers and POWs from the armed forces of Ukraine were there. Mr. Bolvanov said that local residents heard constant screaming from the building. And across Europe, governments have been grappling with ways of protecting their consumers from rising energy bills because the market has been hit by Russia's war in Ukraine. The recent explosions in Germany's Nord Stream 1 pipeline in the Baltic Sea were a clear illustration of how little European countries can now rely on Russian gas for imports. 15 of the EU's 27 countries want a Europe-wide cap that would limit the wholesale price of gas. But ahead of the summit in Prague on Friday, there's little prospect of unity. Germany opposes the plan and has forged ahead with its a 200 billion euro package to shield its businesses and consumers, bigger than any other EU country could afford. And the head of the Nord Stream gas pipeline has said that it is unable to inspect the damage following gas leaks last week due to restrictions imposed by Swedish and Danish authorities. The company, whose shareholders include Russian gas giant Gazprom and 4 European energy companies, said that according to the Swedish authorities, a ban on shipping, anchoring, diving, use of underwater vehicles, geophysical mapping, etc. had been introduced to conduct a state investigation around the damaged sites in the Baltic Sea. Citing Danish authorities, the processing time of the Nord Stream AG request for the survey may take more than 20 working days. And the ship that was going to investigate the damage hasn't been given permission to depart by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Last week, 4 leaks were discovered in the pipelines near the Danish island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, and President Joe Biden had called them a deliberate act of sabotage. The UN nuclear watchdog says the head of the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, who was detained over the weekend in what Ukraine called a Russian act of terror, will not return to that job. Ukraine said a Russian patrol detained Ihor Murashov as he traveled from Europe's largest nuclear power plant to the town of Anahoda, where many of the plant staff live. Ukrainian staff continue to operate the plant in conditions that the IAEA says put safety at risk. According to the statement, the IAEA understands that Mr. Moroshov is now with his family in territory controlled by Ukraine and will not be continuing his duties at the ZNPP. It is not yet clear who will replace him in this role. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi said that Mr. Moroshov had been released without specifying whether or not he would return to the plant earlier on. And Russian authorities in Crimea, which Moscow annexed from Ukraine in 2014, have fined a local beauty queen for singing a Ukrainian song. Olga Valyeva was accused of discrediting Russia's military and promoting extremist symbols after a video showed her singing a red venom. The 19th century military march is popular among Ukrainian nationalists. Ms. Valyeva, who said she had been unaware of the song's associations, was fined 40,000 rubles. A second woman who had sung the song along with her was given 10 days in jail. Crimea's Russian-installed Interior Ministry posted a video where the two women publicly apologized for singing the song. 34-year-old Valyeva won the Miss Beauty Queen Crimea 2022 contest held in Sevastopol at the end of May, causing something of a sensation on social media with her tattoos. Let's discuss now with Professor David Aworawo, head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos. Good morning to you, Prof. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Ladi. Nice to be here.
Let's look at what we have been reporting this morning. Possibly, I don't want to scare you, if indeed this scares you, but the reports are that, yet unconfirmed, but that Russia is moving strategic nuclear weapons by rail to Ukraine. Apart from the scare element, does this surprise you?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't because the Russian leader has projected himself as a desperate individual who is willing to employ anything at his disposal to project, Russia's place in the global system and to also cement his ideology of Russia's assertive interventionism at this time. So it is not surprising to me that, what we are hearing, but it's scary for everybody. We all know the capacity of nuclear weapons and the potential to cause mass destruction. And so it should be worrying to just anybody on earth that so many years after the end of the Cold War, there is the prospect of the use of nuclear weapons in any war. Recall that the last time a nuclear weapon was used in war was August the 9th, 1945 in Nagasaki. Since then, nobody has had the courage to use nuclear weapons in war. They have always been for deterrence. So to hear the movement of nuclear material here and there for war should be concerning to everybody on planet Earth.
At the war front itself, the situation seems to be backing the Ukrainians. The momentum is on the side of the Ukrainians, although the Russians are reporting this morning that their partial mobilization has already resulted in 200,000 people being enlisted. So it doesn't look like this is going to go anywhere soon. But at the same time, the Ukrainians, although they may, I mean, you are in a position to tell me if that's correct, they seem to be coming to that part of the party a bit late. The Ukrainian foreign minister is now beginning a tour of Africa, following the tour of Africa that the Russians did much earlier on, I think in July. Do you think that the Russians haven't sewn up the support of the African countries that have skin in the game here? What can the Ukrainians do with the African continent at this point?
Well, not much will be achieved, really. It will only be for sentimental identification with Africa. African states have made up their minds regarding where they belong in the war. A large majority of African states condemn the war and side with Ukraine in the war because they see it as a violation of international law, the invasion of an independent state by another state, without any justifiable reason. African states, the majority of them have taken their sides with Ukraine. But a couple of them are non-committer, South Africa and a few countries here and there. They believe that there's no need to take sides in the war, and that diplomacy should be encouraged to end the war. So the talk will not change much. It will only it will only play the role of we have come to express our gratitude for supporting us, and those not supporting us still consider supporting us because of a commitment to international law. Beyond that, I don't see what the visit will achieve. It will just be for that sentimental reason of we have come to seek your assistance, identify with us, and then support us in the war. Other than that, there isn't much that visit is going to achieve.
The Russians have the advantage, of course, of having boots on the ground. I know that yesterday I was speaking with someone who reminded me that the Russians have boots on the ground, even if they are private mercenaries, but they are associated with the Russian authorities in Mali. And increasingly, following the coup that happened a couple of days ago in Burkina Faso, it looks like the Russians are also going to get a foothold in Burkina Faso. That's apart from the places where, unconfirmed, but that they also have footholds, the likes of Ethiopia and one or two other places. So that's why I asked the initial question that, the Ukrainians seem to be coming to the party a bit late, and they may not be able to project the kind of footprints that the Russians already have on the ground, both in terms of military and even economic relations.
Yes, Russia's influence in Africa is expanding, especially in those troubled countries. Troubled countries that were initially close to France, that are no longer comfortable with France, are now thinking of, new allies in the West. And Russia, has featured as a veritable ally that these countries are trying to, get close to. Mali and now Burkina Faso. Like I said before, the coming of Ukraine to come to, the tour of the Ukraine diplomatic leaders to come to see how they could get some African states to shift from Russia to support them. I'm not sure it will change a lot. It won't change a lot because those countries that identify with Russia, they've made up their mind already as to where they belong. And so Ukraine coming now to try to see how, if you can use the word woo, some African states, to jump ship from Russian, collaboration to close ties with Ukraine, that would not likely fetch anything. Even though, I should add this, that those African states that are thinking that Russia is going to help them defeat terrorism and all that, they are making a mistake. Mali and now Burkina Faso. Russia is engrossed with its own troubles in the war with Ukraine. And so even though Russia has a boots on the ground, there isn't much that Russia will be able to offer in terms of support, against jihadists, which is a major reason why these countries, actually in West Africa, former French colonies, are trying to draw close to Russia. But taking all together, Ukraine's diplomatic efforts to try to get some African states to abandon Russia and support Ukraine will not likely yield fruit because these countries are taking their stand and they are forging ahead for now.
I will want to leverage on your knowledge of history, Prof, and take a look at where we are strategically today. You have the NATO allies, the EU backing Ukraine, you've got the Russians, and as you've just pointed out, you have countries who have tried to remain in the middle somehow, many of them in Africa, but then you had the likes of India who have not condemned the invasion in strong terms, and those who have condemned it are still doing business with Russia and so on. The situation of strategic national interests does not seem to suggest that countries have learned the lessons from history. You talked about August 1945. That's maybe almost 80 years ago now. And yet somehow we seem to be repeating the trends that led to that August 1945 incident. Why is it so difficult for strategic national interests to align with history?
It is difficult because humans tend to be forgetful of past events and their consequences. People who do well really are people who reflect on history and allow historical developments to influence their decisions. For instance, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine wouldn't have occurred if Putin has learned from history. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia, February 24th this year, is a reflection of not having a sense of history. If Putin had a sense of history, he would have sought some other means to resolve the crisis. For instance, look at it strategically. Russia's reason for invading Ukraine was to get Ukraine from joining NATO, to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. Now we have Finland and Sweden, other Russia's neighbors, who are now very close to joining NATO. So even if Russia succeeds in getting Ukraine from joining NATO, the other two countries that are going to join, is Russia going to start another war with Sweden, another war with Finland? So it's just lack of a sense of history, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And what we are hearing about movement of nuclear material will even be a greater blunder than Russia's invasion of Ukraine. When a nuclear war happens, it takes place, the living, according to J.F. Kennedy, no survivor, you don't see any survivor. And if there's any survivor, the living will envy the dead. Because these weapons, the capacity for destruction is monumental. It can destroy the whole planet Earth, with no human beings there. And if God miraculously creates another group, they have the capacity to destroy up to maybe 15, 20 times. So nuclear weapons are built for deterrence since August in 1945, and they are supposed to just be for that reason, not for war. Because of the fact that when you want to fight to win a war and live to celebrate victory, not to win a war that the victor will perish, the one attacked will perish. So there is this lack of sense of history manifested by some leaders, and Putin has revealed himself as one of them. We hope that people who have surrounded him would raise attention to the catastrophic consequences of the possibility of a nuclear war, and that should restrain him from any attempt to escalate this war. As we have said several times, diplomacy remains the only option that will bring this war to an end and have some silver lining in this thick cloud.
Indeed, one would hope that the correct people are listening to you, Professor Awurawa. Thank you so much for your time and your perspective this morning.
Thanks so very much, Laddie.
We're going to take a break, and when we return, Ukraine's First Lady accepts Night of Freedom Award at Warsaw event. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Let's take a look at some of the business outcomes that are associated with this conflict. And for that, Ini John McQuad joins me. Ini,
Good morning. Good morning.
Turkish officials have asked Russia to delay a portion of Ankara's payments due for natural gas. Why?
Because they're broke.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, that's the straight answer, because they're broke. So, Turkey is really broke now. The lira, that's the currency, has dropped about 28% since the beginning of the year. Inflation is at 83.5%. So you can only imagine. S&P has downgraded their credit rating to almost junk. That means for them to go out to get money as loans is going to be very difficult, because they are perceived as being very risky. Things are really expensive, starting with transport fare, electricity, food. Things are really expensive in Turkey now, so that's why they're asking that their payment for gas be moved to 2024. Now, we don't know if Russia is going to accept it.
Yeah, because I was going to say that if Turkey is broke, The Russians need money too.
But Russians are rich. I mean, we've been talking about how they're making money. They are making money.
They're making more money than the Turks.
Yeah, than the Turks. They have their oil and gas. I mean, Russia is very developed. They've developed their resources, and that's why we see. And they still have friends like China and India. Even though we're hearing, you know, the little drums of sanction threats coming from the Western states, Western countries,
Someone I was
and the
speaking
US.
to said that both those two countries you mentioned, India and China, are too big to be scared of sanctions.
But they are. I mean, I think we see India making some little moves of you trying to say, oh, okay, we're just doing it out of necessity. We don't really want to do this. We actually condemn the war and things like that, you know. So, I mean, everybody needs everybody. I think that's what happens at the end of the day. Even though, according to them, like China and India, they've come out to say they really need this oil. Their population is large. They need it
for consumption and various things. Now, the economy of Ukraine, many people said no surprise here, has shrunk 35% this year so far.
Yes. I mean, it comes as no surprise. I guess it's just the World Bank making the numbers known, because obviously a country that has been devastated by war, their resources, their exports, the world is feeling it. I remember a conversation I was having, and then someone was like, nobody even knew about Ukraine, and yet we were enjoying the wheat that comes from Ukraine, you know. So now we do know there's a country like Ukraine, not just that.
And it's important.
And it's important. So obviously, as outside the world or the other parts of the world are feeling that pinch of Ukraine not fulfilling its role, the economy is also feeling it. You know, we talked about how their vast land and cows, their cattle, you know, are not being sufficiently used anymore. Obviously, this is a country that, well, I won't go there, but I wanted to say, it's not like Nigeria that you have a large part of the economy as informal. So it's not captured in the data. In Ukraine, they have everything captured. You know, so when they say half of their land or a quarter of their land or their cattle is not being productive, then you also see it in the economy. You see it in the data.
The figures,
exactly. And so that's just the information that we're getting there.
When you said this about, I think it would be about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, we said we'll wait and see how it will work out. But now the figures of this are also in now. Those Russians who are able to go to Finland have dropped 90%.
90% in a week. 90% in a week. Between last week Monday and this week Monday, we've seen those numbers drop by 90%. Remember they talked about, they're bringing new embargo, new visa restrictions.
That's right.
You know, because they didn't want, because they noticed that a lot of Russians were moving to Finland. Of course, that puts a demand on their own resources. We're talking of energy, we're talking of gas. It puts a demand on that. But there's also, of course, the good part that the tourists come with their money to spend. But there's the negative sentiment of we don't want them to use our country as an escape route. And it's also been recorded that they go through Finland to some other Shenzhen countries. Yes, you know, so they didn't want that. So now we've seen on Friday, which was the 30th of September, there was a closure of the border in Finland. And then, of course, you have those visa restrictions now. So you have a drop, massive drop in Russians that are able to enter Finland. And well, I don't know if other countries will follow. Some other countries are still...
That was going to be my follow-up.
I don't know.
We'll have to see how
because there's also the temptation of, let them bring their money. At least use that. And
Finland's loss will be our own gain.
Exactly, things like that. But, I mean, let's see if other countries will follow suit.
Indeed. And for all the other business news of today, that's midweek news, Ini and her crew will be on Business Morning after this, and then on Business Incorporated. Thanks, Ini.
Thank you so much.
Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenska, was awarded the Knight of Freedom Award at the Warsaw Security Forum in Poland. The international award is conferred annually to outstanding figures. Last year's recipient was the jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The two-day security forum held in the Polish capital will include British Defense Minister Ben Wallace and German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, discussing topics related to the war in Ukraine and energy security. The event is organized by the Casimir Pulaski Foundation and the German Marshall Fund of the United States. In the sport, reports indicate that Ukraine is set to join Spain and Portugal in the bid to secure the hosting rights of the 2030 FIFA World Cup. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and the relevant bodies of Spain and Portugal have already ratified the agreement and the details of the arrangements. The new partnership is due to be announced by Spain and Portugal's football bosses during a news conference at European governing body UEFA's headquarters. Spain and Portugal have already launched a joint bid for the 2030 edition of the World Cup and even considered Morocco as their third partner before dropping the idea, with Ukraine seemingly taking their place. And Ukraine's Shakhtar Donetsk are back in the UEFA Champions League as they face defending champions Real Madrid at the Santiago Bernabeu. Shakhtar Donetsk is unbeaten in 2 Champions League games. The Ukrainian club is second in the group, that's Group F, on 4 points, behind leaders Real Madrid, who are on 6, after the win in Leipzig and a 1-1 draw with Glasgow Celtic in their temporary home in Poland. That's the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Nadia Keridoluale. Do watch out for updates at 5 o'clock on The World Today. The program is back tomorrow. Good morning.